Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's edition of Liberty Action Network TV. I'm your host, Doreen Finkel, and tonight we are going to be talking about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, their importance, and also how we can get this in the education, the K through 12 system. And with me here today is Joe Aziz.
Hello.
He is a student from Montclair State University, and he was also a libertarian.
Yes, I am.
Correct. And did you graduate this year?
I finished my master's in January.
And are you planning to do anything in politics or?
Yes, I'm trying to stay active, volunteer when I can. I haven't been associated heavily with YL anymore because of time constraints, but I'm planning on reaching out to them during the fall.
Okay, let's start with the Bill of Rights, and perhaps you can tell us exactly what they are.
Well, it's sad, but a lot of people don't know that the Bill of Rights sets forth the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, and they were put in after the Constitution was ratified. In fact, it's a compromise between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Now, the Federalists at the time, a lot of people would know a few famous names: George Washington, Hamilton, Madison. And the Anti-Federalists they represented more of the middle class, if you could call it that. Consisted of their main members were Sam Adams, Patrick Henry, and there were two opposing views of how government should run in this new country. And the Federalists believe in more of a centralized power, strong central government, with power concentrated in, I guess, would be Washington, but at the time Philadelphia. Whereas the Anti-Federalists wanted the states to have more power.
Would you say that that's the big difference between the Democrats and the Republicans today?
It's one of them. It's a fun outline to draw up. You see, well, obviously libertarians and Republicans and conservatives believe that the states should have more power, and honestly, a country as large as this shouldn't have a huge centralized government. That wasn't the original intention. Now, at the time, the colonies there were fewer. The population was much smaller, a lot of things didn't exist. So I even believe the Federalists wouldn't have gone as far as the Democrats are planning to do and have done with our country, or the liberals in general. The Republicans have a part to play too.
They do. And you had mentioned James Madison.
Mm-hmm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, he's a Federalist, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if you were to define federalism, what would be like a good definition?
Strong centralized government. Power concentrated in one area and not divided equally amongst the other subsidiaries, in this case the states or the colonies.
And there was one other person, Thomas Jefferson. He seemed to be for states' rights,
Mm-hmm.
if I remember correctly. Yes. So he would be considered one of the Anti-Federalists.
Yes.
So now let's go back to that time era, okay, which was 1780s, 1790s, 1789. And if you can sort of give us a background of the time frame that the Bill of Rights was written in, like what was going on and all that.
You had this we have this new country established, and now the founders were in a heated debate. There was obviously two dichotomous ideologies: federalism and anti-federalism. Now, they still wanted to get along. Unlike today's Democrats and Republicans, they actually wanted to come to a compromise. And see, the Federalists wanted to outline rights. I'm sorry, the Anti-Federalists wanted to outline rights. Where the Federalists said that they didn't want to do that, and the reason was, which wasn't a bad one, that they said any rights that we don't define, a government could eventually abuse. So we don't want to outline any. We just want to call it a general fundamental rights.
You're right when you say that, but yet so often today we see our Constitution getting trampled.
Yes.
Okay, and if you remember, the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. Let's just talk about the Bill of Rights for a minute. It's the first 10 amendments. Amendment 1, mm-hmm. freedom of speech.
Yes, I've used that before.
Right, and that's the most famous one. It's pretty much for all of us. Mm-hmm. Also, freedom of religion, for the right to petition. Mm-hmm. That's the First Amendment. In other countries, they don't have this right. And if you remember, Arshak Arshak Benlin, who came to Montclair to speak, he was actually a Bulgarian-born citizen, and he was raised under communists. And pretty much, if you speak against the government there, the penalty is very strong. And so you make a smirk on that. And I just want to talk for a minute, and we're going to go to the Second Amendment, the famous one, the right to bear arms.
And the right to form a militia.
Right.
It's arguably one of the most important of all the amendments because it protects all the other ones.
Right. And given what's happening today, how the left is trying to circumvent the Second Amendment, and the government, believe it or not, is buying up the ammunition.
Yes. It's founded. I know it's a conspiracy, but there is some truth founded in it. But aside from that, the left, generally, the ideology of the left throughout the world, whenever they move to seize power, they notoriously disarm the population before seizing it. This happened in Germany before the Nazis took over. This happened in Russia. This happened in China. In each occurrence, they disarm the population, and then all of a sudden, all the rights are gone.
Right, and I want to bring up Arshak again because in his speech to the students at Montclair, he had said that the people in Bulgaria could not own weapons. It was only the government or the police or the army. So if you were unhappy with the government, if the government was imposing severe policy, you know, making life horrible for you to live, then you don't have anything to arm yourself. Or if, you know, which so often governments do, they go on the offensive, you know, and you get a tyranny in there, and if they don't like you, they can do stuff to harm you.
We've seen this in the past century numerous times, and it's deplorable, but the Second Amendment was put in place not so we could hunt deer, but so we could prevent government from doing things like this.
Right.
The founders knew, by studying history, they knew that governments inherently will, if given enough power, they will always turn corrupt.
And abuse it.
Yes. It's human. It's in a sense a form of human nature. When you concentrate power like that, it's going to get abused.
So let's go in the future for about 3 years, 4 years from now. Where do you see the Second Amendment in our country?
I am quite terrified about where the Second Amendment is leading. However, there are some states that are taking a stand. I know Texas is. There are a few states, I believe one of the Dakotas is trying to get a law in the books that would prosecute a federal agent for enforcing the gun laws and protecting the citizens of their state to own assault weapons, I guess as many handguns as they want. But the larger states with the larger populations, they're already largely disarmed. There are no concealed carry permits for anyone who's not a police officer or security guard. A judge has to grant it in this state, for example, or New York. And we also have a larger government than other states do, and it's pretty scary. I hope there's a change. Hopefully, if enough people get informed, we can stall this or at least inhibit its progression. But I fear that we may lose the right to keep and bear arms unless it's a single-shot weapon in a few years, I guess.
So what do you think we could do to help stop this?
Well, to protect all the other amendments as well, informed populace.
Become active.
Yes. Back to the founding, Franklin said that he knew eventually this union would fall when enough people were uneducated about our rights and how we were started. And if you don't know, if tyranny thrives on the disenfranchised and the ill-informed, it doesn't work well if the population is informed and content. And the left knows this as well. And
right, and we do have a large percentage of people who are what you call low information voters.
Yes, yes.
And who only watch channels 2, 4, and 7. But let's go to Amendment 3. Okay, the limit on quartering of troops. Okay. And perhaps that one you have to go back into time to
really appreciate.
Yeah.
This amendment was put in place in response to during the Revolutionary War. The British troops so the colonists were ordered to house and sustain British troops against their will. Didn't matter. And it's a form of occupation of one's private property. And this was at the time, a very well received amendment. And I don't think it met any debate amongst the individual states. I mean, getting it and making its way into the final Bill of Rights. That is, some of the amendments did.
Right, right. Because the colonists at the time were required by the British to house the troops.
Yep. And feed them.
And feed them, right. I can't imagine us harboring the Chinese troops over here.
No.
You're right, okay. And let's go to Amendment 4, Protection Against Unreasonable Search and Seizure.
Nowadays, this is pretty hard to do considering the use of drones and technology and the recent incident with the NSA. I wonder if this amendment is even real anymore. I mean, it is, but it's not being respected, and nothing's being done about it. And then this is pretty scary times. The government just knows exactly where you are and what you're doing. One of the reasons why this was put into place at the time was because founders knew that if government was becoming corrupt, people would organize to try to overthrow it. One of the responses to prevent a group from doing that is the government will search, I guess, a gun cache in someone's house, or if it ever came to that, I'm not advocating violence, or anything, or even if you have an underground printing press and you're trying to print propaganda that would go against the tyrannical government, they would seize it, and you would have nothing to do about it.
Right, and let's bring up the incident that happened at the Boston Marathon with the Boston bomber. Okay, well, after that, okay, the city was in what you call lockdown. Okay, and we were going into people's houses and to what you said search and seizure, and I'm not clear if they had to get a warrant for that.
I don't believe they did. They used the extenuating circumstances, which would say that if a police officer sees violence going on in someone's home, they can use that as a reason to just let themselves in as a form of extenuating circumstances. However, to seize an entire city is a little extreme, I think, even as far as extenuating circumstances goes. And I honestly believe that it wasn't constitutional. However, I don't see anyone successfully challenging it in this current day and age.
Right, but now who's to say that they won't just come in and do that to anybody who they don't like?
No one. And these rights are really important, and they're flagrantly being disrespected by the administration and even local and state governments.
Now, as we were talking behind camera before, I had mentioned to you that I just upgraded my cell phone, okay, and one day, a couple weeks ago, throughout the night, I was getting the emergency signal. You know, every 3 hours it came. 3, 6, 9, 12, I can count them. And that's an annoying sound. And I never signed up for an app on the phone or anything. And a dear friend of mine had said, well, did you read the fine line in the agreement when you signed to upgrade this? I said, no, nobody does, because it takes several hours to read that. Yeah. And he said, well, this is now standard. And it's standard in which a telephone company can actually give your cell phone number to various agencies, like the Weather Service, or lately, like you mentioned, the NSA. Okay, well, there's surveillance programs. The one being PRISM, which went in and actually the government went in and asked them for your cell phone number. You know, and once they have your cell phone number, they can pretty much track you. Mm-hmm.
As well as your web searches, any content, text messages, everything.
So maybe the law needs to be amended here and say that you need to get a warrant for this.
So modernized.
Modernized, yes.
Yeah. Well, lately when there's a problem with the Constitution, the amendment process isn't used, even though it should be. But I agree. There might. I'm not a legal scholar. However, I'm sure there was a case involving this, not PRISM, but involving cell phone searches or wiretaps or something like that. Maybe it was prompted by the organized crime era, I would assume. But,
Right. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Amendment 5, Due Process, Double Jeopardy, and Self-Incrimination.
Well,
That's where you can take the Fifth Amendment, okay, as in Lois
Yeah,
Lerner,
yeah.
and most of the IRS officials.
Yeah.
And why is that in place?
Well, protection against self-incrimination is very important. You don't want to, other governments can coerce a confession out of you, or can pretty much keep interrogating you until they, I guess, you get tired and you convict yourself in a sense. So you have the right to not take the stand, and that's very important. You also have the right to counsel, to represent someone who is familiar with the laws of the land and can argue in your defense. And due process, the whole process of you're charged with a crime, you're formally indicted, there's a grand jury, there's a petit jury, et cetera, et cetera. You can't just be hauled up in front of a tribunal and condemned on the spot.
Wow. So if you look at the case with Lois Lerner, well, maybe she's hiding something.
Oh, yes.
Because then she took the fifth.
Yes. Yes. Originally, I think it involved cases of criminal cases where if someone was accused, and let's say they were wrongly accused, then they had the right to remain silent, not incriminate themselves.
Wow. The next one is the right to a speedy trial. Why would our founders put that in there?
Long, drawn-out trials can change public opinion, I believe. I think the Sixth also confers... wait, no, that's not the Sixth, it's the Seventh. I'm mixing them up now. Well, a speedy trial, a long, drawn-out trial can put an undue burden on the defense or even the prosecution, like in the O.J. Simpson case. We were talking about that back there.
Yes, that seemed to drag on for quite a bit.
Yes. And there needs to be a reasonable amount of time, since the burden of proof is on the prosecution, and as far as a criminal case is concerned, it's not on the defendants. It's not the defendant's responsibility. If a defendant obviously has limited resources compared to the state, and if a long trial could exhaust his resources, then they could turn against him in his favor. The founders would have preferred the guilty criminal go free occasionally than the innocent get convicted.
So, going back to the O.J. case, maybe that's why O.J. didn't get convicted, because he didn't have a speedy trial. That thing lasted forever.
That was more of an anomaly. Like I said, I'd still, in my personal opinion, I'd rather the guilty go free occasionally than an innocent man get convicted. In that case, the prosecution did not provide they didn't provide proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Even though it was very clear that he did, there was still a slight amount of doubt, so you shouldn't convict someone.
Right. And then let's go to the next one, Amendment 7. Trial by jury in civil cases.
In this, the burden of proof isn't as heavy. Instead of beyond a reasonable doubt, it's preponderance, and the burden is not on the state, it's on the plaintiff. And in some cases, the defendant, but usually the plaintiff, because they're the ones, this would be a lawsuit. Civil disputes are important, obviously. If there's a disagreement between two parties over property or anything like that, it shouldn't be settled through violence. It should be settled through civil courts.
Right, through the courts. And I do want to mention that the O.J., the civil trial to the O.J., from Nicole Simpson and her friend there, Ron, can't remember his name, but they were eligible to get money from O.J. Simpson for the wrongful deaths of her and Ron. Can't remember his last name right now. For Goldman, right? Okay, so you're right when you said the burden of proof happens to be less in the civil case. Let's go to Amendment 8. No excessive bail or fine, no cruel or unusual punishment. So does that the one that mean, like, let's say you steal a piece of gum, you shouldn't get your hand cut off?
No.
Is that one?
Not like in an Arab country or Singapore. This amendment was put in at the time. The British had some, at the time of the founding, the British had some strange punishments. Flogging was popular, barnacling, which wasn't very fun.
Tell everybody what flogging is. They might not know what flogging is.
Getting whipped in public.
Oh, okay. Okay. Gee, we see that a lot now. Right, right.
Excessive punishments, obviously, it may deter crime, but they're also very cruel and not becoming of a civilized society. So it's important to see.
In our society today, can you remember any kind of cruel and excessive punishment?
No, not off the top of my head, actually.
I can't say I've seen any cruel punishment, but I certainly could say I've seen excessive bail.
Okay, in that sense.
Or monetary.
Yes.
But not any kind of whippings or.
No, I mean, if there are police abuses by police officers, but that wouldn't be legal punishment anyway. As far as excessive bail is concerned, I know that it's strange that some murder cases, in some murder cases, the bail is set lower than theft in certain areas, or an organized crime, or racketeering, for example. Which, I mean, it's still bad.
Set lower than theft?
Yeah, in some cases, depending on who the criminal is.
It depends on who the judge is, too.
Yeah, that too.
And depends on if the judge has had a good day or a bad day.
Yes.
Okay, then let's go to the next one. Amendment 9, and that's one that puzzled me a little bit. It really said people retain rights, and I had to do my own research on that. But what exactly does that mean?
Well, like I said originally, the Federalists didn't want to enumerate a list of rights for fear that they knew that you couldn't logically list every right on paper. You couldn't. There's always going to be something you're going to miss out. So they didn't want the rights that weren't listed, whatever those rights were, to then be abused by the government. The Anti-Federalists wouldn't ratify. They didn't want to ratify the Constitution unless they had enumerated a list of rights. So the compromise was the Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment allows for all the rights that aren't listed to be retained by the people in themselves. This one is generally brought up with regards to privacy. It was one of the primary ones used in the Roe v. Wade case, whereas the fetus was within her, so a state could not dictate what she does with that fetus based on her own privacy.
Wow. Now, let's go to Obamacare for a minute. Which one so far would Obamacare?
Obamacare hits a few. First Amendment, clearly, freedom of religion. Our federal tax dollars are going to, if you're Catholic, I am, going to fund abortions. That's wrong. That's impeding on my First Amendment right. One could say it clearly hits the Ninth. It could also hit the Fourth because the government has your medical records, and that could be a warrantless search and seizure, if you want to make that argument.
And let's talk about that for a minute.
And also the 10th.
Right, because they say the IRS is going to enforce this.
Yes.
Well, then the IRS in their data bank has your finances, how much you make, including, who knows, they may even know what political party you're associated with.
No, clearly they do.
So just a thought has come to my mind, saying that when I go to the hospital and I need something done, well, the government may say, you're not a registered Democrat. You're not getting health care benefits. That thought has crossed my mind. And plus, with Obamacare, it's the individual mandate.
Yes.
Why should somebody be forced to purchase something?
By the fact that they were just born. Being born, you have a burden of a purchase. I don't know how that was upheld. But it was, and I guess it now is the law of the land. I wouldn't call it constitutional, but since the Supreme Court says it is, I guess it is.
No, but they called it a tax.
Yes. This gets murky. Is it a fine or is it a tax? Everyone has to pay taxes, but not if you're working. So now it's confusing.
So you might as well not work.
Yes. It's encouraged.
The benefit of staying home.
Yeah, and then become a registered Democrat.
Wow. And then let's go to the 10th Amendment, okay? And that is the Commerce Clause, okay? And we already mentioned that Obamacare infringes upon this.
Yes.
So you can explain how.
Interstate commerce. one state cannot impose a tax on another state specifically, and then or differently between each state. So New York can't say, when I deal with New Jersey, the goods that I import from New Jersey or that I export to New Jersey are taxed at 5%, but the goods I deal with Pennsylvania are 7%, so on and so forth. And also, they have to respect currency, a universal currency. Obviously, we have federal money. States can coin their own money. The 10th Amendment also gives states any of the rights that weren't specifically listed, the first 8, and I guess the rest that are all 28. The states have the power to make laws as long as they don't infringe upon those rights. And then below that, any laws the states don't make, that as long as they don't infringe on those rights, the people retain as well. So the 9th and the 10 give the people, us, anything that's not outlined.
I had often wondered, instead of instituting something like Obamacare, how come they wouldn't allow the individual to purchase health care across state lines?
That would be that would have hit state commerce. And it was surprising.
So that clearly
this wasn't brought up in the debate when this was going on. It was our side was saying it, but the Democrats just ignored it.
No, they swooped it under the table.
Yeah.
Wow. So then basically the whole bill is unconstitutional.
I would say. I mean, it is and it isn't. Legally it is. But I wouldn't say it follows the Constitution by any means.
It's just a matter of who is interpreting the Constitution,
Yes.
who is in power.
Yes.
Okay, and right now the liberals are, and they tend to interpret the Constitution liberally.
And we have an activist Supreme Court, which is essentially legislating from the bench, and exercising, in essence, executive power, which it shouldn't be doing. But that's the way our country is going. If liberals can't win at the ballot box, they'll go to the executive branch. If they can't win by the executive branch, they'll go to the courts. That's their way of doing things.
If you can't win by that, they'll do other things.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't want to know what those are, but yeah.
So now let me ask you this. You're how old? 28?
26.
Okay, 26. So you have your whole life ahead of you. Where do you see this country in, let's say you're 50. You have 30 seconds.
Let's see. 50. I don't want to say dystopia. I'm more hopeful than that. I have faith in my generation. We are mobilized. We're mobilizing, I should say. If enough people can get informed, we can start to reverse this. It can happen. The American spirit is still present. It just needs to be revitalized a little bit.
Okay, and thank you for joining us, Joe
Thank you
Aziz,
again for having
Montclair
me.
State University. And I'd like to thank our viewers for watching us today. And for more information on our show, go to campusteaparties.com. That's campusteaparties.com. And thank you for watching us.
Thank you. Good.
Yep.
We look good on TV, though.
You did it. You did it.
Thanks.
You did it,
I got a
mister.
little nervous halfway through.
Yeah, I guess you hit it.